Welcome to Lair of the Alchemist, and welcome to another Dudes Talking Metal. We're a little light on the dudes at the beginning here, but we've got Mike and Butch are going to be dropping in with us a little bit later. But for right now, we've got Tony here joining me at the Lair, and we today are going to be giving you some albums that we like, good albums, great albums, maybe that don't sound that good and don't sound that good in the sense of the production, the sound quality. Maybe there's something lacking in the sound quality. Maybe the sound quality just doesn't live up to the greatness of the music, great music, but the sound quality, the production values are a little bit, not up to where the standard of where the music is. And when we say production, what we're talking about with stuff like that is the balance of the instruments, the tone of the instruments, the overall tone of the recording. Maybe the recording is really muddy, or maybe it's got some other weird frequency thing going on. So we thought it would be fun to share with you some albums that we really like, that we think are really good, but just in the production sound quality side of it, it just doesn't live up to where the music's at. All right, so Tony, what do you got here for your first pick?
My first pick, I'm going to go with Manowar's Sign of the Hammer. Some great classic Manowar tunes on here. You got All Men Play on 10, Thor, the Power Heads on here, Mountains, Sign of the Hammer, of course, the title track, the Guyana Cult of the Damned. I just always, it sounds like this album is just, I don't know, it's not a good mix. And there's been some CD reissues that I never picked up. I don't know if they ever did a remix of this or not, but typically with the early Manowar records, you have Joey DeMaio's bass is very, very high up in the mix too.
Yeah.
This album, it actually just drowns out the guitar. I mean, I love the production. I mean, I love the first album, and the production doesn't bother me on that one at all. This one, just for some reason, and actually had who was the I think they had I can't remember who they actually had that produced this record, but I want to say it was someone of name that did it. Let's see. I should have looked at the beginning, but anyhow, it's very just I don't know. It's just a terrible mix on it. And the original version I ever had of this was on a cassette that I got through the fan club, through the Manowar fan club, because Sign of the Hammer and Hail to England were kind of tough to get over here in the U.S. Especially at that time, I was buying pretty much all my music on cassette. And I remember getting a cassette through the fan club. It didn't even have a cover. It was just a cassette with the songs printed on it. And it
Wow.
sounded like it was terrible sounding. And I always thought, okay, well, maybe it's just a cassette. Maybe it's just a bad recording. And then I think I bought it on CD sometime in the 90s. And I think it's the version that's on the Grand Slam label. And to me, that doesn't sound that much better. The best sounding version is probably this vinyl version, which is actually on Virgin 10 records. But like I said, it's very muddy, and that bass is just overpowering, the riffs on it.
Mm.
I've seen some people mention this in albums. When you see like people post stuff on Facebook, what's a bad? Just the same question we're asking here. What's a great record with bad production? And someone actually picked "Sign of the Hammer," and Ross the Boss replied, "No, that would be "In the Glory Ride." So evidently, which I think "In the Glory Ride" is probably second in worst production next to this one. But I love that record so much. I've always just kind of let it slide. But yeah, yeah, like I said, I was looking here. The band may have produced this. Like I said, I didn't do my homework there, John. I didn't look and see who actually produced the album. But it seemed like I had remembered seeing it was like a person of merit, like someone we had seen their name before. But oh, here it is, Jack Richardson. Jack Richardson did this, and Tony Platt. Now, Tony Platt, I know that name from Thin
Yeah.
Lizzy because he did some. So I don't know. Maybe Joey snuck in the studio when they weren't there and turned the bass up. I don't know, but but
Yeah.
that's my first choice there. Sign of the Hammer. which is still got some great songs on it, and I can live with it, but it's just not the greatest production ever.
Yeah.
So what's your first pick?
Okay. Now remember, people, don't come at us because we like these records. Okay.
I do.
We do
I
like
love
these
this record.
records, right? So I don't want people to come out like, how can you not like that record? We like these records, but the mix just doesn't live up to the music. All right. This is probably going to shock some people, but Rainbow Rising, this record, and the proof of this is if you get the deluxe version of this, there's two mixes. There's the original, which I believe is the New York mix, and then disc two is the LA mix. The original mix has almost no bass guitar and maybe a tiny little bass guitar, but almost no bass frequency on it. It's very, very thin sounding. It does not, and when I heard that other mix of this, where there's more just bass frequency and bass guitar, I mean, it's already a great record, but it just made it so much more. And when I listen to this, I always kind of wish that there was just more bass on it. It just to me, which is a shame. And again, this is a good example. The music overshadows the mix. It's not, the Stargazer. What are you going to say? This is all great. This is all classic, amazing stuff. But I just wish it was mixed a little. I wish it had more bass guitar and more bass frequency to it because sometimes as I was preparing to do this, I already had this in mind. I don't even remember what I was listening. I think I was just listening to a random. I've got an 80s cult metal playlist on my Apple Music. I was shuffling through that and I thought, oh, okay, I know tonight I'm going to do Rainbow Rising. Let me just give it a quick listen to see if maybe my memory is just not right in this and I don't want to go with that. As soon as I went to it, it was like
Yeah.
just top end, it was like the whole bottom end had just disappeared in my headphones and it's just like all guitar and drums and it's like there's barely any bass on it, which is a shame because it's Jimmy Bain on this and he's a great bass player, but it just does not have the bottom end that I like. And if you have a chance to check out that other mix of this, it just to me it just makes a big difference in the sound. So yeah,
I
legendary
agree.
album, but for me,
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily is I can't sonically say that this is a fantastic sounding great record, but sonically for me, it's not a great record.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. That other mix that came on the double CD that came out, yeah, it's sounds so much better. I remember listening to it when I first got it. I listened to a lot of music in the car, traveling back and forth to work and going places. And I was one of the first things I noticed when I got that CD, and I was like, oh, what's the difference of these mixes? I mean, what's the big deal here? And the
Yeah.
first time I listened to it, I've never really like hated the production on the original, but when I heard that new mix, I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is really good. I've always thought that Long Live Rock and Roll was the best sounding of the 3DO releases for Rainbow.
Yeah.
Everything's mixed well on there. Of course,
Yeah.
you got Bob Daisley on bass there. He may have gone in and said something, but I don't know if he was even there when they mixed it because he was that band was changing members so fast.
Yeah.
You never knew. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. What do you got for your next pick?
My next pick is one that I think I would have really liked this album a whole lot better if the production just didn't seem like it was the whole sound of this record. It sounds like it's being stepped on. And this is probably the best Kiss album not to have Kiss logo on it. And that's Wendy O. Williams' Wow album, produced by none other than Mr. Gene Simmons.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, all the Kiss members at the time are on this record. I mean, you've got Wendy O. Williams, of course, from the Plasmatics, and she's got West Beach from Plasmatics is on it, and so is he's on guitar, and so is TC Tolver, the drummer from Plasmatics, was on it. I think this was going to be a Plasmatics album, maybe originally, and they just kind of changed the name and went up with Wendy O. Williams as a solo record. But yeah, you've got Ace Frehley on this record. Paul Stanley's on it. Eric Carr. Um, yeah, it's a lot. And Gene, of course, is playing bass because he's under a fake name. He goes under Reginald Van Helsing, but that's him on bass. But Gene produced this. I remember this getting a lot of hype when it first came out. You remember the video for "It's My
Yeah.
Life," which "It's My Life" is one of the. It's probably my favorite Kiss song that should have been a Kiss song. They finally recorded it years later, but I always said that should have been on "Creatures of the Night." They shouldn't have given it away. But that video was so over the top with her doing her own stunts and stuff in it, and but yeah, so I went out and bought it. The first version that I ever got was on cassette, and it was on the same label as this. This is Passport Records. And I just remember that cassette. I was always like, God, this just sounds like crap. It sounds like it's just being stepped on.
Yeah.
It's just muffled. And I always, once again, oh, it's probably the cassette. It's probably what it is. And
Blame
then
it on the
and then
cassette.
then I got it on vinyl because you could pick this up in the cutout bins for like $2 anytime, and it didn't sound any better. I will say, somewhere during the 90s, Razor and Tie record label reissued the Plasmatics catalog on CD. And I have the CD version of this, and it does sound much better. But it's just like I said, it's some great playing on here. It's just so muddy. It's almost like it's playing in the bottom of a tunnel or something. It sounds like everything's just being smashed or covered up, like you threw a blanket over your stereo or
Yeah.
something. It's not very, very bright sounding. But such a good record. Some great songs on it. The best of the Wendy O Williams solo stuff for sure. And it's just, I would love to see it get a complete remix. I can't, Gene's done production on several other bands. He did Keel, The Right to Rock, which to me, that could be an honorable mention for me just thinking about it. That one's not that
Yeah.
good of a sounding of a record. He did a couple of Black and Blue records that I guess are okay. I've never really compared them sonically to their early records. But sometimes it's not up to the producer too. Sometimes it's the engineer. The engineer can
Yeah.
kind of screw up the sound. It doesn't have the producer's not in there pushing knobs and stuff. So,
Yeah.
this says this was engineered by Frank Filippetti or something here, and Tom Roberts. So, yeah, I don't know. Right Track Recording Studios in New York. So it was mastered by George Marino, who did so many mastering jobs for people. But who knows, man? Who knows why it came out like this? But it is what it is.
Yeah, sometimes the producers can be various things, and sometimes they're just people that are organizing the band, organizing the music, telling them play that twice. Why don't you try to sing it this
Yeah.
way? That type of thing. Then there's other producers that are very hands-on the knobs, getting the
Mm-hmm.
sounds and everything. There's certain producers that always have engineers that work with them because, they have a relationship. And sometimes the
Worked very well.
engineers,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, sometimes the engineer is the guy who's really responsible for the sound. Sometimes things can get screwed up in the mastering phase, where mastering is the band's recorded everything. They hand the tape off to a guy for mastering. And mastering is you're putting an EQ on the entire thing, you're balancing levels, you're making the song sound consistent. So things can go wrong at various stages, and sometimes it's hard to say exactly who's to blame for the particular
Mm-hmm.
way a record sounds. Sometimes it was pressed incorrectly, something was damaged in the tape, or something was misaligned, or something like that in the tape machine. And when they made copies of it, it just went afoul. But all
Well,
right, this,
we always bring up Born Again, how the
yeah.
muddy mix of Born Again, and I have a CDR that a friend of mine actually owned an acetate of Born Again, and he made a copy to
Oh wow.
CDR, and it sounded brighter, more brilliant. You know what I'm saying? Than not so buried and
Yeah.
muffled like what we got. So it's like you said, who knows? Who knows what happened in the whole process? I've heard Tony saying something about some stuff getting switched out and stuff like that, but that's one of the ones I guess we'll hope that we'll see a remix of. But I honestly, I've never had a problem with that sound of that record myself. I think it just adds to just the whole
Vibe of
darkness of
it.
the record. Yeah, that whole vibe is just what it is. It's just dark and heavy, you know.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for because people have lived with it for so long now. And I like to use the example of The Godfather, the first Godfather movie. If you watch that movie, man, is it like dark, dark in the sense of lighting. Like there's so
Mm-hmm.
many scenes where they're sitting around in the house talking, and I swear it's like they're sitting in the dark or something. It's just so dark. And if you did that in modern, like if somebody were to touch that up or something, they'd probably brighten all that up, right? But then it would take away from the mood of it. And even though technically it might look better with more lighting in the room, we've seen that movie so many times. We've lived with that movie so many times that even if they're all, even if somebody could make it better, it never works out that way because same thing with a record. We've listened to that record so many times the way it is that it's almost hard to hear it any other way. You just get used to it with its flaws and it's just whatever it is. And that almost becomes part of the experience of the record. So I think, yeah, I mean, I would still love to hear a remix of it just to hear it, to be able to sometimes distinguish, like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that's what he was playing on his kick drum there because it was always buried in the mix or something. It would be interesting for that, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be better. Sometimes you just, you get used to the way a particular record sounds and you can't really imagine it any other way. This may be an example of that with this next record that I
Okay.
have here. This is a record that's an all-time metal classic. But I've never really liked the sonics of this record. And part of that is because I'm a headphone guy. I like being able to put headphones on, and I love it when guitars are panned left and right, heavy left and right, and I can hear like, one guitar is doing this, the other guitar is doing that. And this record does not have that really at all. Ace of Spades. When you listen to this record, it's like it's in mono. The guitar, the bass, because they recorded it basically live. And this is the dilemma that one guitar bands have when they make a live record. Live Evil, the original Live Evil mix, suffered from this also. When you have one guitar, and usually in the studio, guitar players will overdub another guitar. So you have one in the left, one in the right. They didn't do that here for most of this record. There are times where there's two guitars, but for the most part, it's guitar, bass, drums, vocals, all dead center in the middle. So when you listen to it, like the song Ace of Spades, it sounds like it's in mono. Like there's no stereo. It's just in mono. And it just has I hate to say this, it has like a small sound to it. It doesn't have a lot of bottom end to it. I will say the record sounds better than any CD version that I've heard. I've heard there's multiple remasters of this record. My original CD of this sounds terrible. It's real tinny and
Mm-hmm.
I throw in that mono sound. Lemmy's bass isn't very bass heavy and the frequency is very much like a guitar, so it just sounds like there's not a lot of bottom end. They did, and I don't know what happened to it. Tony, I don't know if you've ever heard anything in Dolby Atmos. I don't know if you know what Dolby Atmos is. It's something available on Apple Music. I think it's available on Amazon Music. Not
You
available
you
on
actually you actually brought this up in a previous conversation once. We talked about this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there was, I don't know what happened to it, but there was a Dolby Atmos mix of Ace of Spades, the album, that was on Apple Music for a couple months. It's not there anymore. Don't know what happened to it. But oh man, did I love it. It was like it took the instruments and it just moved them. It just made it sound, instead of the sound being like this, it opened it up
It brought
more.
it out.
So you had this depth, and it was like, wow, there's the bass, there's the guitar. They did the same thing when they remixed Live Evil. The original Live Evil, everything is pan dead center. Because again, that one guitar problem. If you don't do that, what you get is the early Van Halen records. Guitar,
Bass.
bass, And it's sort of when you listen to it with headphones, it's like the guitar is all over here, the bass is all
Yeah.
over here, and it creates this sort of weird balance thing, when you're listening with headphones. So Live Evil, when they did the remix of it, they didn't spread it out too far, but they spread it out enough that there was now some separation and depth to it that you were able to sort of hear the instrument. To me, it just sounded bigger. So I've always felt that Ace of Spades, that album, it's just it I love the record. I just wish it was mixed a little bit better. I wish they had dropped in maybe a rhythm guitar, an extra guitar, so they could have stereo spread it a little bit more and give it a little bit more bottom end. Again, I think the vinyl sounds a lot better than the CD does. And there are some CD versions. There's this particular CD version that I think does sound better. They add some bottom end to it. No Sleep Till Hammersmith, that's another one that has that. Everything is just pan dead center. So it has this really kind of like narrow sound to it. And again, I'm somebody that likes to put on headphones and have that sort of like, depth to the sound. And I just don't really hear it on Ace of Spades.
Wow. Yeah. I can agree with that. I've always thought it was kind of a thin sounding album until those Sanctuary reissues that came out in the early 2000s. Those all sound excellent. And I'm sure they've come up, like you said, they've done other different versions of remixing them. How many times have those albums been reissued over the
Yeah,
last
it's nuts.
25 years?
On Apple
you
Music,
know,
there's like five versions of Ace of Spades. They'll always
wow.
show you like one of them, and then underneath it, it'll show you any other versions. And there's like five versions of the album
Wow.
out there. It is kind of nuts. And I was really excited when I got that Dolby Atmos mix. Another one that since we're still waiting for the other dudes to show up here, I'll throw out some honorable mentions. I didn't put this one on here because in general, I think the mix is okay on this, but I always had a bone to pick with this particular record. As a bass player, there was never enough bass on this album for me, and I'm thinking of Jailbreak by Thin Lizzy, the original Jailbreak. The bass guitar was just never quite loud enough for me on that record. And I know they just did, I don't know if it's a Dolby Atmos mix or if it's just a straight up remix of it recently. They did
Hmm.
that. They did, I think, Johnny the Fox. And did they do a third one? I can't remember, but they brought the bass up, the bass guitar up in it. And I was
It
like,
is.
yeah, man, this is like, thank you. It just makes Jailbreak sound
Yeah,
better
that
for
sounds
me.
really good. You know, I did. I had this record in here in this room for another reason, and I said, if we do an honorable mention, I could bring it up. Um, and you'll probably agree because you're a bass player. Injustice
Yeah.
for All.
Yep. This is
I
the
mean,
poster child for this, right?
this is how many times platinum is this album now?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Poor Jason Newsted got completely cut out of it. Have you heard the version? It's online. There's even a bootleg album out called Injustice for Jason, where they
Yeah.
went in and
Yeah.
put the um brought up the bass tracks, or either somebody played some or something. I don't know how they did it, but yeah, that's uh that's a huge record, and it's I don't know, it's just the whole thing. The record kind of sounds empty in spots. It's just got a
Hmm.
very just I don't know how to really describe it because I hadn't really thought about bringing that in. I just, like I said, I just thought of it just a second ago, and I had their album in here, and yeah, it's definitely one that it has a live feel about it, like almost like somebody was took a couple of
Hmm.
tape recorders and microphones and put them in a room and recorded it like that, and um, I don't think it really bothered me that much when it first came out. I was excited that there was a new Metallica record, but then over time, when you started really listening to it and stuff, especially
Yeah.
if you ever listen to it through headphones, it just doesn't sound great. You mentioned something a while ago about brought up and made me think about being funny growing up. I remember a friend of mine had a car stereo and his speaker never worked on one side, and he hated to play Van Halen tapes because all you could hear was the bass and drums and David Lee Roth, and like Eddie's like buried in the distance somewhere. You could
Yeah.
hear the guitar. It's
Yeah.
just kind of funny.
The Thin
But yeah.
Lizzy, they called it 1976, and it's a remix of Jailbreak and Johnny the Fox.
Hmm.
And on
It's a
both
box
those
set.
mixes, yeah, you can hear the bass guitar is mixed much higher in the mix, and I always felt it for as much as I love the Jailbreak record, I was like, man, I just wish the bass guitar was a little bit louder because man, when you hear those cool bass lines that Phil plays, like even in like the boys are back in town, man, he has this great like bass line that he plays in there that's for the most part pretty much lost, buried in the original mix. Here was another one that I had in my pile, and this one is more a victim of its time. And this is the first Cream record. And at this time, stereo wasn't a thing. The Beatles also suffer from this too, where everybody was releasing things in mono at this time. That was the standard. Stereo was considered like a hi-fi collector's thing or something. So the bands like the Beatles weren't, the stereo mixes were an afterthought. They tended to not even be around for those. It's the same thing here, except where with the Beatles, you get this weird panning where like the instruments are on one side, the vocals are on another. Here it's panned even worse. It's like all one side is like the instruments and the drums, and it's like just voice in the one chant. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's just unbearable to listen to it with headphones on. It feels like, you're one ear. Same thing with the Beatles. And it's even though saying that with the Beatles, everybody says you got to get the mono versions of the Beatles because the early Beatles, that's how they were there for the mono mixes. That's the mixes that they wanted, that they intended. And this plays into we were talking about Born Again. Uh, I've lived with those Beatles mixes, stereo mixes for so long that that's the way I'm used to hearing them. So when I'm just listening in my house, it sort of the stereo blends itself together when I'm standing away from the speakers. I very rarely listen to the Beatles on headphones because I can't stand the way it's flipped over like that. Or sometimes if I'm really in a Beatles kick, I'll even go in Apple Music. You can switch over to mono. You can tell it to play in mono. And that way it just sort of straightens that out with those Beatles mixes. And there's some of the albums now, a bunch of the Beatles records have been mixed in Dolby Atmos, which straightens out this whole weird mix thing. It balances out a lot better. So yeah, that's sort of a victim of its time. The late 60s, there was that period when they were switching over to, hadn't quite switched over to stereo yet. And some artists just handled it way better than others. Like the first Jimi Hendrix record, that sounds pretty decent, even though it's done in that sort of fashion. Uh, but if the Beatles and that Cream record, that first Cream record is just it's unbearable to listen to that. It sounds terrible. That one I have a mono. That might even be it. I have a mono version of that, and that's pretty much the only way you can listen to that record.
Wow. Yeah. Well, we come from the era too. We were coming getting into all the thrash bands and all the stuff that was coming out on the indie labels and all the new wave of British metal stuff. There's so much stuff we could touch on in those categories that just you know production was not up to par on those records, but they're still
Yeah.
classic records and we love them. And yeah, that's just part of the sound, part of the vibe of the record is what we know.
Yeah, a lot of those thrash records are real bright and harsh sounding, especially when they're the bands that didn't have the big budgets and everything. Sometimes we could even do an episode where it's like where the bad mix, the lo-fi mix is actually works for it. There's a lot of I enjoy like underground metal bands that have those real simple, primitive, lo-fi type mix. Sometimes it can really add a real cool atmosphere to the record. A lot of those early Metal Blade albums and stuff like
Oh yeah.
that, they're very straightforward, simple mixes, but it adds to the atmosphere of the entire thing. So it's all situational. And again, these are records that it's not like I don't listen to these records. It's I love these records.
Yeah,
But
same here.
it's just when you're listening to it, you're kind of like, man, I wish that the bass was there was a little bit more bass on this, or I wish that there was more of this or more of that. So,
Yeah.
all right, well, I think of the other dudes. I've just been contacted that the other dudes are on their way. So,
Cool. Are they knocking on the door?
not quite yet. They're not knocking on the Zoom door, but I think they'll be showing up here any second now. So, let's see. I'm trying to think of some other
You
records.
know, we were talking about Metallica a while ago, and there's a guy that does these remixes on YouTube of Metallica records. I forget what he's called, but I mean they're really good remixes, and he's done one like on Fade to Black, for instance.
Mm,
During the Kirk's last solo, he's brought up Cliff's bass lines in the mix somehow, and Cliff's playing this crazy stuff that I never even heard before.
yeah. Yep.
And yeah, it's pretty cool. I really wonder how these guys go in and do all this stuff, and they're able to pull a track up and stuff when they don't have the masters. But it's amazing the technology nowadays and what you can do with stuff if you've got the
Yeah.
time and the knowledge.
I think they're probably doing it in two ways. A lot of this stuff, like the Metallica stuff, for instance, was available on those old Garage Band or Rock Band games, you remember?
Uh,
And
yeah,
the way those games were made, the bands provided them with isolated tracks, and that's how the game functioned. So people were able to crack into the games and thus have access to the individual tracks. The other thing, like with And Justice for All, that's I think that entire album was available on one of those games, and that's how people were able to do that. And now with AI technology, you're able to isolate and separate instruments. Although the technology isn't 100% there, sometimes depending on the mix and the instrument you're trying to pull out, you can get like artifacts and weird noises and stuff. Like I've heard isolated bass tracks using AI, and sometimes it's very garbled and kind of muffled, but sometimes it's really clear. And it's getting better and better. And I really see a point where the AI is going to be able to real cleanly separate these things, and you're going to probably see a lot more of this where people creating their own mixes. And it might be a thing that at some point I could see somebody like Kiss doing this, right? Like giving people pay a certain amount of money to get all the isolated tracks to Destroyer. And with the Kiss program, mixing program, or you could put it into any garage band or any program that you have, but I could see Kiss capitalizing on this and having their own thing that they're endorsing. But you buy this package that has all the isolated tracks and you make your own mix, have fun and make your own Kiss Destroyer mix. And I could totally see that being a thing. And with the AI, people may be able to do it on their own anyways, but I could totally see that. And I've heard some of those Metallica mixes. I don't know if I've heard Fade to Black, but yeah, there's another example of I could have listed those Metallica records because as much as an amazing bass player Cliff is, after the first record, it's hard to hear his bass on Ride the Lightning, and Master of Puppets is a little bit better, but a lot of times his bass is just way too low in the mix, and it's such a shame. And when you hear it, like Fight Fire with Fire, that little acoustic intro thing, there's a super cool like bass line that he's playing in that that's just completely like buried in the mix that you just don't hear. You don't hear it at all. So it's cool that people are able to do this and they're able to you know uh you're able to hear these things in a different way. I mean, why not at this point?
yeah.
Why not give it to let the fans do that? I mean, I guess they're afraid somebody's going to go and do a horrible mix of Destroyer and then it's going to be on YouTube and, somebody may mistake it for the real thing, but I don't know. All right, well, we
Hey, what's
got
up?
Butch here with us.
What's up, Butch?
Sorry, gentlemen. I'm like the kid. Like I feel like that kid. Like sneaking into class like
It's
long
all right.
after it started, man.
We already went through our
Yeah.
picks. We can tell you our picks really quick.
Yeah, let's hear them.
All right. Well, I did Rainbow Rising and Ace of Spades. Now, Rainbow Rising for me was because there's just not enough bass on it. And my proof of that is the deluxe CD version, which has the LA mix, the original mix, and I think no, the New York mix is the original mix, I think. And then there's this LA mix. And in the LA mix, there's way more bass frequency, bass guitar. My opinion sounds way better. Ace of Spades for me, it's the original record is mono, basically. All the instruments dead center. I don't like that. I like when things have some
Yeah.
separation. There's not enough bottom end bass frequency on it for me. There was briefly a Dolby Atmos mix of Ace of Spades on Apple Music, and it just opened up the whole mix, and it was like, whoa, this is so cool. The guitar's here, the bass is here, the drums are behind the bass, and it's just like, whoa, was hearing all these things I had never little details I had never heard before. So those were my two. Tony, what were your
Mine was
two?
Manowar, Sound of the Hammer, because
Oh,
it's
okay.
just not a good mix. And I was saying it's way too much bass in it, but it's Joey DeMeo, so who knows?
Yeah,
It's just
explains
but he's
that.
drowning, out Ross's guitars on that one. And I also picked the Wendy O Williams first solo record that Gene Simmons produced. It's just such a muddy. I described it as being. It almost sounds like it's someone threw a blanket over your stereo. It just sounds so muffled sounding. Just not a great sounding one. But I got to take off, guys,
Okay.
and head out. So thanks for having me. Always great to be here, and see you guys next time.
See you,
See you,
Tony.
Tone.
All right, Butch. So what do you got? You want to give us your pick here? I think Mike will be
Sure.
joining us here soon, but you might as well get us started.
Yeah, I mean, man, this is good. The first one, let's just start with it. The first one is going to be no surprise for anyone that knows me. It's super obvious. I'm glad. Like, I was a little bit nervous someone else would have picked it, and that's "Kiss Is Hotter Than Hell." Um, it's just one of those records. Like, anytime you have a discussion about records that sound pretty crappy but are good records, "Hotter Than Hell" seems to fall into the
Yeah.
conversation at some point. I mean, it's not just a problem with Hotter Than Hell, it's the first three records, really. All of those songs sound better on Kiss Alive.
Yep.
Like any of that material sounds better on Kiss Alive. None of the producers were ever able to capture the energy and the vibe of the Kiss Live show. Kramer finally did it on Kiss Alive, but the first two records, the first record's good, but it's kind of like limp sounding compared to the energy. Even if you listen to
Yeah.
bootlegs of them back then, it's so much like they were so much heavier live, and the records are kind of like Hotter Than Hell. It's heavy, but it's so muddy.
Yeah.
Is the problem? It's just this melange of nothing really. It all kind of smushes together, and uh,
Yeah.
I mean, I love the record. Obviously, I'm a huge Kiss fan, and it gets to be like after a while, there are certain records you just like, well, that's just the way the record sounds. And you learn to love it for what it is. I mean, I can't, like, I didn't even bother with I know that um, there's that dude out there that's doing the remixes of it and stuff. And I am meaning to check it out, but I haven't done it yet because part of me is like, well, if it's not coming from the band, and from the original master tapes and it's not them doing it, like I don't know that I need to hear it, that that's a fan creation in a way. But I would like to, it would be interesting to hear. I don't know with this record if it's a problem and how they got the sounds actually, honestly, to begin with, if it's something they could even improve. Like Iomi's talking about redoing Born Again. I don't know if Harder Than Hell was something that was just because of the mix or was just the way it's recorded. But yeah, that's my first one. I think it's got great songs on it. It's heavy, but it just sounds
Yeah.
real like just kind of like there's not the separation you want in the instruments, and it doesn't
Hmm.
have
The drums
And it
don't
just
sound good on
yeah,
it. It's the drums are
it's
very,
just kind of murky instead of
yeah,
being like an album like that. I feel should be like could have been more powerful. Like some of those riffs and stuff really
yeah.
deserve to uh, come
And
out more.
and even from yeah, we talked about this, Tony and I, about how, we keep saying this disclaimer. We like these records, so don't come at us like, how can you not like that record? These are records that we like, but just sonically,
Yeah,
maybe don't live up to, they're not sonically as if we were just taking them purely on their sonics, the production and everything. And what plagues those first three Kiss records too is, and I think Hotter Than Hell is the worst for this. It's the cloudiest. For me, I always think of like a blurry screen, like somebody took a picture and there was a smudge on the screen or something. It's like everything's slightly
yeah,
out of focus. It's blurry. But also, like the so many of the songs are too slow. They're too like sluggish. And this goes to what you were saying about not capturing their energy. Like I'm thinking of the song Hotter Than Hell. It's like da 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 da
yeah,
da da. It feels like it's going backwards almost. It's like so like kind of sluggish, and it's just like the drums sound really small. They don't have, whereas when they play it live,
yeah, exactly.
that all jumps out at you, right? But here on this album, it just sounds like it's like everything's too slow, and like they were just I don't know, just those whole first three records just it's a shame. Like I mean, I'm not as you're a much bigger Kiss fan than I am, but I struggle listening to those records. Probably Hotter Than Hell is probably my favorite because even though the production is kind of murky and everything. It sort of reminds me in some ways of like Born Again, or I don't know why it reminds me of Be Forewarned by Pentagram, where it has this sort of like murky quality to it. And sometimes it kind of works for some of the songs, but other
Yeah, I was
times you're like other times you wish that there was just more clarity to the whole thing.
yeah, agreed. I think that I think where it works, the production actually works to the benefit of the album in spots is in the heavier songs, like Strange Ways, which is
Yeah,
like kind of like real doomy sounding anyway,
yeah,
like that and Watching You, and Parasite, like the heavier ones on there, it doesn't affect it as much, but it's in your, you don't want your, I don't know, like you said, like Hotter Than Hell is a great example. It's kind of like not that that was going to get radio airplay or anything like that, but like that's your like a single type of thing, man. Like you want to have some pop to it and a little bit more clarity in it. So yeah, definitely agree. Like it in spots, I think it kind of fits the vibe, but then it fails the album. Also, but oddly enough, like so many like you hear about bands that were really influenced by that record, like
yeah.
Nirvana and the Melvins and things like that get
I
compared
can hear that a little
favorably
bit.
to.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's my first one.
All right, Mike is here. So we've got Butch and Mike from For the Sake of Heaviness. Mike, Butch just handed in his resignation to the Kiss Army. He listed
Yeah.
Hotter Than Hell as his first album. You're officially kicked out of the Kiss Army.
Turn in your
I had to
card,
take my
Butch.
address offline
Yeah.
so no one finds me.
We're gonna bomb you all over your
We're gonna
social
die. What is
media.
that
I'm butch
expression?
from the for the sake of sunflowers. I am not butch
Yeah.
from for the sake of heaviness.
He doesn't like
We don't
hotter
want
than
your
hell.
cred. We don't want your
Our
credit, street
yeah,
cred in the world of Kiss to take a
our
hit
subs go back
there.
down. I destroy Lair of the Alchemist and dudes talking metal in one fell
No,
swoop.
I dump on Kiss all over my channel, so people know I'm not the biggest,
This is
I'm
a
not a
safe
Kiss
place
lover.
to.
This is a
Yeah.
I
safe
love
haven. You can come and right. All right, Mike. So here we're talking about Tony was here. Tony had to leave. He's got another show he's recording.
Yeah.
So we've been going through our picks with albums we love, great albums,
Yep.
but maybe the production, the sound quality doesn't, match the level of greatness that the album is. So what do you got for
Yep.
your first pick?
My first one, and I'm pretty sure it's already been discussed before I got here, but
No,
Tony?
nobody's picked it yet. It seemed like such an
Really?
obvious.
Just
Yeah.
briefly mentioned, but was not a
Really?
pick.
It's been talked about. Yeah.
Okay.
Because
Well,
it's
I
kind of the
mean,
poster child for this.
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. It is. And you know what? You know, I can kind of forego a lot of the conversation because it's been put out there for years and years and years. But I gotta say, over, listening to this album a million times, and I really genuinely love this record. And it's almost become the crap production has become part of this album's charm for me. I'm
Yeah.
just I'm so used to it where I don't hate it like a lot of people will just tear it to shreds. It's just it's part of the lore now of Born Again, this flat garbage production. And to me, it's like that sound is almost part of the charm of the album now. Now, I have this one, and this is the unmixed demos. This isn't the Manor tapes like a lot of people have.
Okay.
Whether or not this, is a clone of the Manor tapes or whatever. Um, this sounds really good. I thought I was going to
Hmm.
get kind of scammed when I picked this up, but it sounds incredible for the unmixed versions of it. And you can see where, if Tony fulfills all of our hopes and dreams and does come through with the remixed and remastered version of this, I'm really hoping it does sound like these unmixed demos because it is heavy. Disturbing the Priest is ridiculously heavy. The title track is ridiculously heavy on these. So I think we're all, because we're so used to listening to the original lousy mix, that when we do finally get, a proper uh, repackaging of this album, we're going to be like, whoa. And I think this album's going to be heavy. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the poster child for bad production for sure. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
But,
Tony and
but I
I,
had to bring it up.
yeah, we Tony and I talked about it because again, it's just one of these albums that always comes up. And I made
Yeah.
the comment that it's one of these things when you live with something for so long, even if it's flawed, you just get used to it. And when you get
Yeah.
used to it, it's like trying to take some movie you've seen 1,000 times, Goodfellas or something, and you're going to
Sure.
try to brighten it up and
Yeah.
rechange things. And so it never works
Right.
because you've gotten so used. Now, that said, I'd still love to hear a remix of it just for the sake of having a remix of it and just to hear it as just, a
Yeah. I
curiosity
think
thing. But
I think a good true remix, especially with today's technology, I imagine the clarity on that album is going to be
yeah,
just nuts. Just the articulation of the instruments and the vocals and the separation of everything.
yeah,
Um, I don't want it to take away from, like I said, the charm of the album because we are all so used to it. I don't want it to come off sounding like, completely foreign, but
right.
I do think a good treatment on that album is going to definitely drop some jaws.
All right, what do you got for your next pick, Butch?
Um, so Mike and I were actually talking earlier, and something he said reminded me of why I have an issue with this record, and that's Coroner's Punishment for Decadence.
Mhm.
And This is an album I actually have to reacquire. I thought I had it, and it's one of those ones that I'm like, "What do you mean? I did another show. It might have been here on Dudes or something, but I know I talked about this record before, and it turns out I don't have the record. So anyway, that's beside. This is how I make every show like 5 hours long. Um, but yeah, I mean, I bought this record. I'd seen the video from Mass Jackal on MTV and really liked the song. Despite at the time I was still coming along on the more like at the time what I thought were extreme vocals. I mean, little did I know how extreme vocals were going to get. Like the vocals, like in Celtic Frost and Coroner, were nothing compared to what was going to come down the road. But this album, it's a great record. I mean, the riffs and the changes are blinding on this. Ron Royce, Marky, and Tommy T. Barron like just tear it up. Like it will like bend your mind in half to listen to the record. I mean, they're doing this while being heavy. It's progressive, but it's still like thrashy and super heavy. And But the problem with the record is, and the record is the songwriting is great. Sudden Fall is awesome. Mass Jackal Arclight, like all this stuff on this record. I mean, it's just a killer record. It's one of the best records of its type and of its age. But man, Ron Royce's vocals. Now I know the guy's not Pavarotti, so but that's not a reason to bury them. I mean, they are buried on the record. It's really hard to hear. The vocals just sound like they got in the studio and got the vocals to like where it was like just where it just a little bit quieter than everything else and then turned it down even more. Like you can hear them, but it's not up where it should be. And I know that like the focus really of these records is the musicianship, but you want to hear the vocals. I mean, that's the despite his shortcomings, like in terms of like being a real singer or anything like that, um, it's still part of the songs and part of what makes them cool. So I always wanted to hear a version of this record like where the vocals were turned up, and I think that's something they got right with the records that followed. But on this one, like they're just too buried. And then on top of that, in general, I think the record like sounds better than the first one did, but it still has its production issues. Vocals aside, like the drums have like a odd sound to me. I feel like the bass drum is like it's really like present, like you can really hear it, but it sounds like wet cardboard or something. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it just has this thud to it that isn't like it's almost it's not powerful the way that you'd want it to be. It's just like it's you can hear it really well, but with the way that it kind of thwops like thuds, it's kind of like I don't know. It's almost like distracting at times. So yeah, for me, like it's just as Randy Jackson would say, it's just okay for me, bro. Um, but I love the record itself, man. Like I said, it just it comes down to the vocals and that drum sound. That I think
Yeah.
um, otherwise it sounds okay. I mean, I don't expect a thrash record, a band that's on their second record, to have like a sterling production, but it would be nice if those couple areas were different.
And sometimes with the extreme metal stuff, like as you were talking about this, it reminded me of this particular mix, and it's really because of one specific instrument, and it's Death's Leprosy album, and the snare drum sound on that record
Mm.
is just, it's like this gated snare, and it's loud in the mix, it's obnoxious sounding, and because it's death metal and you get a lot of like, you know, lots of snare, there's times where you're just hearing like this like sound that is just unbearable. And when Tony was here, we were talking about as a bass player, there's albums that I just wished there was more bass on, like Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets.
Yeah.
It's like Tony was
And
talking about
Injustice for All.
some Injustice for All. That's another poster child for bad mixes. Death's Human record, that's another one where Steve DiGiorgio, all these great bass lines that are just sort of lost in the mix. Unfortunately, the bass guitar is in heavy metal an instrument that tends to just get lost in the mix a lot of times, get lost
Yeah.
amongst the guitars and everything. But yeah. All right, Mike, what do you got for your second pick?
Well, I was gonna just to Butch's point too. I always thought the production on that record sounded like somebody threw a wet blanket over everything. It just does not produce. And when you have a band the caliber of Coroner, you need that production to really put that band up front too. They're with the progressive, things that they've got going on. They were always
Yeah.
a unique band that stood up, out above a lot of the other contemporaries of that time. So, okay, speaking of extreme metal, my second album that I have an issue with, also because of the vocals, this is my favorite black metal band for the most part. Emperor, Anthems to
Mm,
the Welcome at Dusk.
mm.
Now,
Yeah.
this is the original pressing CD. I don't have an original vinyl. And from the moment I got this, because I was a huge fan of Nightside Eclipse, from the moment I got this, I was like, "Where's Ishan?" I'm like, what? Where is it?" His vocals are so buried in the mix that it really takes away from the magnificence of this record. Um, there's a reason this is heralded as like their finest moment. But that said, I've never been able to fully appreciate it all the way because Ishan is so damn buried. I mean,
Yeah.
there's other little tweaks that could have been done with the production. So I always hoped that they would touch that up. So I got the 2017 reissue, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Sounds the same. Now, this isn't there's nothing on here that says this is a remix or even, much of a remaster. Well, it's a half speed master. Um, for whatever reason, the vocals are bumped up a little bit better on this one, where you can hear him and it's, you can make out what he's saying. It's a lot more. So this is the go-to for that. But now I know that black metal was always, lo-fi with their necro sound and everything. But everything that Emperor had going on was so grandiose or
Yeah.
grandiose, however you want to say it, that for the vocals to be that shallow and everything else kind of not so much muddied, but there isn't a lot of separation going on. Now, the Half Speed Remaster definitely has all of that going for it, whether it was done or not, or done secretly. Sounds great. 2 years ago, I went and saw them. They did just like 5 US shows, and they played this album in its entirety at the Aragon, and it was spectacular because the sound in the room was just perfect, and that album just absolutely came to life. So it was such a shame that for so long we lived with this muddy, no Ishan instrumental Emperor album for for the most part. So that has always been a thorn in my side with that one because I enjoy this band so much.
I
So
always
Anthem
thought
is
that
one of the
even the
best.
first two, all right, they're a band that there's so much going on in their
Hmm.
sound. And I know, black metal, it's supposed to be lo-fi and it's got this
Yeah,
cavernous type sound to it. But I agree that I don't know. Sometimes it's just too much for me, and it's like I want to hear what's going on here. And sometimes,
sure.
like with Dark Throne, that sort of real recorded in a cave
Yeah,
sort of works for like the type of black metal
yeah,
that they do on some of those early records. But when it came to Emperor, I always wished that there was just a little bit more clarity. And they were on the last 70,000 tons of metal cruise. It must have been the same tour you saw them on because on 70,000 every band does two sets, and the one
sure.
set they played that album in its
Okay.
entirety. And yeah, it was just, being able to hear it with
Yeah,
I could just hear the instruments better and everything, and it was just really, really cool. I mean, I
yeah.
absolutely loved it. I thought it was really
Yeah, seeing
really
them live
awesome.
playing this, it was almost like hearing the album for the first time again because everything
Yeah.
was so clear. And luckily, and the Aragon usually has really good sound. And we were standing in what I was hoping would be the sweet spot anyway, and it sounded tremendous. So yeah. But
Yeah.
oh,
All right.
what were your picks, John? I missed
Yeah,
that.
okay. I went over them with Butch, but I'll give it to you again, and I'll give it to you really really quick
Merciful
here.
Mike is late. Come
I'll
on.
go backwards. I had an honorable mention, which was Fresh Cream,
Oh,
which
okay.
it suffers from this is a victim of the times.
Yeah.
Mo Mono mix that was made into a stereo mix. So what you get is like everything jammed on one side with like the vocals panned heavy on the other side, and it just sounds horrible. The
Yep.
early Beatles stuff is like that, but it's a little
Yep.
bit more listenable. This,
Ace of Spades.
yeah, I said Ace of Spades because sort of the same thing for me. It has this mono. Everything is just dead center.
Yeah.
There was a Dolby Atmos mix. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dolby Atmos, but Apple Music offers this feature. And they had a Dolby Atmos mix of Ace of Spades on there, where it just separated the instruments a little bit more, gave you this depth, and it just made the whole thing sound better. I'm a big headphone guy. I like it when things are panned
Sure, sure.
left and right. And for me, Ace of Spades, as much as I love the record, it just sounds like it's coming out of an AM radio sometimes. It's just everything is mono, dead center. The other one for me is Rainbow Rising. This one suffers for me from just being too bright, not enough bass the frequency or bass the instrument. And proof of that is on the deluxe version of this, there's the original mix, which I believe they call the New York mix. And then there's what's called the LA mix, which has way more bass guitar and bass frequency. And it just makes this already amazing record sound
that
even
much
that
more.
much better. So those are my picks. Tony picked Wendy O. Williams, and what was his first pick? I can't remember
Manowar, Sign of the
Yeah,
Hammer.
Manowar,
Oh,
Sign of the Hammer.
that
He
yeah,
said too much bass.
Yeah. And it's like on the Motörhead record, I mean you can hear the bass because it's Lemmy, but Lemmy's bass is very guitar-like. So when
mhm,
you don't have the lower end frequencies and again, I'm a person that I like to be able to put headphones on. I love it when I love like when I listen to early Iron Maiden and like Adrian's on one side and Dave Murray's on the
yeah.
other and you just and drums right up the middle, and you've got sort of that separation in the sound like that. I always just dug mixes that were more like that.
I
So,
must be missing the the love of the headphones because it's one thing I've never, not at least not for like the last 20 years. Everything comes out of stereo speakers,
mm,
but like my kids and all their friends, they go nowhere without their
yeah,
cans, and they live and die by it. And even my son is like, you got to hear this song through these, and I will, and I'll be like, just blows my mind. But I don't know. My listening experience is always the speakers and the stereo, and
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe I need to get myself a pair of
Get some heavies and
yeah, some heavies, or I don't know what the other ones are,
get some
skulls or
covers
something.
for them.
I just
Just
saw
some
Judas Priest
sabotage
had
covers.
Judas Priest painkiller heavies, man.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just like when I put headphones on, especially albums that I've listened to many, many times. And, sometimes I'll sit and I'll just listen and I'll just focus in on the bass or the
Sure,
drums or the one guitar or something. And I like to listen for, and I mentioned that I have Apple Music, and Apple Music has a lot of stuff in high res
sure.
audio. It has fair amount of stuff in Dolby Atmos. And I have some AirPod Pro 2s that just sound amazing. So like I've been putting those in and I'll listen to something like Let There Be Rock or something that I've listened to like 8 million times or Paranoid or
Yeah,
something like that. And I'll just hear some subtle, tiny little thing that I never noticed before. Like, man, I never heard him hit the ride cymbal there like that. Or I never heard the bass. There's a little bass note that I never heard that bass note before or something. I never heard
sure.
that hand squeak on the strings or something. And I love that. I love putting them. Yeah, my wife gets mad at me because the only way I can fall asleep at night is I always put headphones on and I listen to music. And as I'm drifting
Sure.
off, I eventually just take them off. And that's
Yeah.
how I fall asleep because I just love like sort of immersing myself
Yeah.
in it and sort of closing my eyes and being able to listen really closely, to hear those tiny little details like sort of buried in the background and
Sure.
everything. I just
Sure.
find it fascinating. So.
For
All
sure.
right. Well, there you go. There's our picks for great albums. It maybe the production it doesn't quite live up to the greatness of the record. Let us know what you think of our picks in the comments down below. Let us know what some of your picks are. Make sure you check out Mike and Butch at For the Sake of Heaviness, and we'll see you all at the next Dudes Talking Metal.
Yeah. Thanks, John.